What's up, everybody? You are now in the backcourt for episode 5, I believe, a Brooklyn Nets podcast presented by Ticketmaster. I am one of your hosts, Lucas Kaplan. My co-host, Sarah Kustok, as always, joining me. Sarah, how you doing?
I'm fantastic. How are you? How are you feeling?
I'm pretty great. You know, we had 2 road games this week and they were down the street from us. So I like that. We talked about traveling last week and now we got the best of both worlds this week. We didn't have to go too far. Just to recap our audience, we have had a loss to the Boston Celtics last Wednesday, I believe, and then 2 losses to the Knicks at Madison Square Garden over the weekend, one of which was an NBA Cup game, and we are recording on Monday. On Tuesday night, the Nets will play the Charlotte Hornets for their first home game of the Emirates NBA Cup. And, you know, if they burn the house down, if something crazy happens, we might tack on an emergency 5-minute, discussion to the end of this. But other than that, what did you make of the week, Sarah?
I thought it was. I think we continue to learn week by week. We may have broken our streak of being able to uh, pod after a
Yeah.
win,
hmm
but nonetheless, I thought there was a lot of things you learned from those games at the Garden against the Knicks. And even you look at the Boston game, and just some of the dissatisfaction that Jordy Fernandez had with the fight of the group at certain moments, in particular in the third quarter and second half. I think we saw a shift of that and resolution of that in the second half of that first game against the Knicks on Friday night, which heartbreaker. He is
Yeah.
shot at the end of the game, opportunity, you come back from a 21-point deficit in the third quarter. However, taking the positives from it is just so much good that came from their ability to come back. Sunday was a different story. Karl Anthony Towns obviously showed his dominance in doing so. I think it really shed a light and showed the vulnerability of this Nets team, missing Nick Claxton, missing Day'Ron Sharp. But overall, the process and the identity that this Brooklyn team continues to build, but has already laid the foundation with, is evident, in that you've got to love.
Definitely. And, to be clear, Boston and New York are 2 of the top 3 offenses in the league by cleaning the glass. Some sites might have them 1 and 2. And as Jordy said, the loss to the Celtics, it wasn't a complete lack of effort the whole time, but you can't have a 10 possession lull. You can't have a 3-minute lull against a team that good. And, this upcoming week, the Nets will play a cup game and then they'll be on the road for 4 games. And it's, as the NBA season always is, another time to put those principles to the test. Before we really dive into the teeth of things, I want to give a couple shout outs. Tonight, after we record, is the premiere of From Chesapeake to Brooklyn, the Cam Thomas story. I don't know if that's exactly the title, but as the Nets have already done with Dorian Finney-Smith and Cam Johnson and Dennis Schroeder recently, they're going to be taking a look in a 30 to 40 minute documentary about Cam Thomas's journey. Can't wait to watch that. I assume you feel the same way.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'll get to once again do a Q&A afterwards, similar
Yep.
to what I did with Dennis Schroeder. And the documentaries are tremendously done by the Brooklyn Nets social team. I feel like everything they do is gold. And the opportunity then to kind of hear from the players fresh off after seeing their story on the big screen, Cobble Hill Theaters, like it's a great environment. I know the anticipation, there's going to be a lot of kids, middle school, high school, those that I'm sure look up to Cam in many ways. So I think just that type of interaction and insight will be a lot of fun. And
Yeah.
I hope that Brooklyn Nets fans will take time, if they had not already by the time they listen to this, to take a watch.
Definitely. The Dennis doc on YouTube already has a few 100,000 views. That's been extremely well received, as it deserves to be. And it's cool because, the other day, walking around MSG, I spotted Dennis's brother, his wife, and his 2 kids coming out of a bathroom. And I was like, oh, wow, look at that. Really allows you to know the people behind the uniforms. And on that note, I also want to give a shout out to Cam Johnson. I covered him distributing food for the holiday seasons with Rethink Food, a nonprofit, and just evident of some of the community work these guys do. I wrote about it. We cover that over at NetsDaily. If you guys want to read about how involved the Brooklyn Nets are in the community, a lot goes into being an NBA player, being an NBA organization, and it's cool when we get these opportunities to look beyond the 94 by 50. However, you know, Lucas and Sarah Kustok, we're going to talk about the 94 by 50. That's what we're going to dive into right now. And I wanted to ask, playing Boston, playing the Knicks, being at MSG, we're talking to a lot of familiar faces up and down the East Coast. What seems to be the general perception of these Nets from people that you talk to 14 games in?
First thing anyone will ever say, they play hard.
Yeah,
They're fun to watch. There is a intensity and organization to this group that is clear top to bottom. Credit to the coaching staff and Jordy Fernandez. Credit to the roster and the personnel. We talk a lot about the mix of veterans, of young players, of those who are maybe getting some second chances in the league, those in their second year. The list goes on. But I think overall, the perception is it's a really impressive group. And I've said this before. I don't know how this team or this organization will necessarily quantify success this season, but whatever it is that that vision may look like or how it tends to be fluid or will be fluid throughout the year, I believe this group will achieve that,
hmm
given the early signs of what we see. And so, Lucas, I know you're out there talking with people too, but I think by all accounts, what they've shown and we've documented in past weeks, the expectations are against top teams in the Eastern Conference in what they're doing. So even if it is not translated into wins, it's something that I think has opened a lot of eyes.
definitely. And you hear, yeah, you just hear that when you talk to people around the league on other teams. And the Celtics was a good example of it because they go up to Boston and, maybe some people are surprised. This is their first look at this team. It's their first look at a Jordy Fernandez team. And then they come back to Brooklyn a week later, and the game's tied at halftime or close to it. And I know they go on a run in the second half, but Boston was ready. Boston was ready to fight a battle, and they did, and that's all you heard from their side. I just want to point out, too, that even though the wins haven't come, they are 5-9, and they are right now pretty middle of the pack in terms of the Eastern Conference. And they've, taken some really good teams down to the wire. And the season certainly has been a success so far in terms of establishing the culture, which Jordy Fernandez is still pointing out that's his number one priority, even on a day-to-day basis. Just establishing what he wants the long-term direction of this team to look like. However, 5-9 probably does undersell what they could be because they've had a few close losses. And this weekend, it felt like that lack of size was really a key factor. How do they, well, first, what are you noticing out there? Like, how does that contribute maybe to some of these close games that have turned into losses? And then how do, they combat that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things you see, and you said it. I think also we've talked so much because it's a little bit fresher of missing Nick Claxton, but I
hmm
think because Day'Ron Sharp has been out for the duration of this, like you almost forget to. So you're not only missing your number one center, but you're also missing your top backup. It was great to see Trendon Watford back there. I think he's going to be a big key and help as he continues to get his legs under him and get acclimated, all those things. But in terms of size, I think you're seeing a lot of smart coaches and opponents able to identify that in ways that they can take advantage. I'll go to the Knicks, for example, pointedly in transition. It's a Knicks team that plays the slowest pace, or if not the slowest, one of the slowest paces in the league. They run opportunistically, but they're not a team that's pushing a ton. And they were well aware that on a net shot, it was likely a Cam Thomas or a smaller player that was going to be the first back. And the
Mm,
first thing they were doing is getting an OG or a bigger player to get on the other end, post them up, try and seal. And they were looking to push. They were looking to take advantage of that, even off of the switches, doing those type of things. And so I think there's a balance to it. I'm going to talk about him a little bit more later in the podcast, but like Dorian Finney-Smith has been extraordinary to me
yeah,
and how but he also had missed some games. And so it's a part of the league. It's a part of the schedule. It's a part of guys having to fill some gaps. But I think overall for Brooklyn, it's the continued. I think the more they get comfortable within whatever systems or whatever the principles are defensively, and that's where I think to me it's the most glaring that they're trying to run. I think it'll continue to improve, and I think then you hope that Nick and Dayron, will come back. Noah getting just more comfortable. I think there's things you look at with him and you're like, "Oh," there's certain moments or parts, and it's like, yeah, he's still 20, and he's
Yeah.
still getting some of his first taste of the league, and he's still you think about where Nick was at, in his 2nd year in the league. You look back to different players. I even think back of a Jared Allen, and, like, it things take time. And so some of it will be problem solving and just being creative
Hmm.
and using quickness or how you're using players, but some of it too will just be patience. And I think there's going to be a steady balance of that as we see these next few games and next few weeks play out.
I do like that you've led with the sort of the way that that lack of size affected the transition game on defense, and then obviously it affects it on offense because you really can't play as fast as you want to when you're constantly fighting an uphill battle on the glass. We can look at individual stat profiles and whatnot, but it really just kind of bleeds across the board all 48 minutes. Nick Claxton has played 40% of the season so far in terms of his minutes and games played, which means I would say, with respect to Ben Simmons and Noah Clowney, who are good at what they do, 60% of the Nets season so far has been played without a center, despite Dorian Finney-Smith's valiant efforts, despite all these guys.
Yeah.
That is a tough formula to win, not just win games with, but to really establish your identity. And I think that Brooklyn doing it without that lack of size does stand out. And for me, it's they can't play as fast as they want to in the full court. And I also think, the other day, Jordy Fernandez pointed out they shot 12 of 30 in the paint. So they are really creating some very strong possessions. They shot 41 threes. They shot 30 shots in the paint and 5 mid-range shots yesterday. But they only score 104 points because they're not playing super fast, so the possessions take a little while. And, they're not finishing at the rim as strong as, below league average, I should say.
And I think, Lucas, that's a great point with that on a variety of levels, but even the finishing the paint, like think about how often a guy, whether it's a Dennis Schroeder or Cam Thompson, we've actually, and I shouldn't cap it on that because we've seen Cam Johnson, Jalen Wilson, put it
Yeah.
on the ground way more often, getting to the front of the cup. Zaire, you can go down the list of players, and I think this collection of a group, as opposed to maybe the last couple of years, I don't want to entirely stereotype it, but there is a multitude of players and more guys that I think can get downhill or will get all the way to the basket
Yeah.
than maybe some other teams have had more just as a collective whole. But when you do that, like in terms of forcing help and then dumping it off to your big or a lob threat
Hmm.
or someone being in the dunker spot, there hasn't been that same punch, or it allows for a big to be able to recover back off that pass, and
Yeah.
it's made for tougher baskets or tougher contests at the rim, because you don't have that Nick Claxton up there throwing it down. And there's been some really, really nice plays and playmaking that has seen that, but I think the frequency of it, because of it, has been a little bit less. And it's also forced some guys just attacks on their own. And again, like the ones that have stood out to me have been Cam Johnson and Jalen Wilson. In some that you've seen probably more than they would regularly do, and you appreciate, but there just hasn't been that same type of dump it in the post and allow someone to maybe work a single coverage and load up on the weak side and then kick out to a 3-point shooter or some
Right.
of those things that you could run, even if you're not like flatly doing a post set or a true post up play, but it just shows a different look on the offensive side that I think the Nets at this point have not had the luxury of running.
Yeah, that's why when Nick was available, and to be clear, he received an epidural injection in his back late last week. There's going to be an update later this week. Jordy Fernandez, the team, it doesn't seem like it's going to be a super long-term absence, but obviously wishing him the best. You never know. There was a play that I'm thinking of where they swing it around the perimeter. I think Dennis drives baseline and dumps it off to Dorian Finney-Smith at the charge circle. And if it's Nick or Dayron, that's what these guys do. They catch it on the block, they go up and dunk. That's just not Dorian Finney-Smith's strong point. And like now all of a sudden he's finishing over a 7-footer. I believe it was Ariel Hukporti. And you're getting a great possession, and then you're not ending it with the one-on-one battle or the look that you would normally have. And I do want to just point out that the Nets' offensive process, I think all 3 games, was excellent. I don't know if they fully achieved the number on the scoreboard you might expect. And that, to me, is where the lack of size showed up the most.
That's a great point. And not to belabor the point, Lucas, but
Right.
the way you said it, the process, you need to still stay true to the process because at some point you're either going to have the personnel, have the players, or it's going to play out how you hope. And so you're right, and they're still running things that then best case scenario, maybe you get a foul and you can get yourself to the free throw line because you can initiate contact. But there is in some ways a imbalance or a disadvantage in terms of your size, and quite frankly too, I think the Nets, especially early on in Sunday's game against the Knicks. And I do not want him to change. And this is an easy thing to say and a much harder thing to
Hmm.
do. It
Right.
doesn't matter the profession. But when all eyes are on you and the amount of talk and scrutiny, like early on in the game, the Nets set Ben up with some really great looks around the basket that he just didn't finish. And you know what? That's going to happen. But you cannot let the history or the build or the concept of all of that affect the fact that you continue doing that. And I think there was one play that he missed a layup, probably should have made, but the next play down the
Yep.
floor, he went strong attack. Did not make a I don't care. You've got to do those things to balance out and complement your teammates' threats and what's happening offensively to keep a defense honest. And so, yeah, no one likes to miss shots. And whether you're missing a layup or you're missing a mid range or missing a three, like it's still keep creating those type of quality looks, and eventually that stuff will go down. But it is about the process, and you cannot get frustrated or allow that to deflate you in terms of changing then how you're going about the process.
100%. There's a similarity that I see when the Oklahoma City Thunder sort of hired Mark Dagnall and they were in a new era, kind of comparable to where the Nets are at. They played a lot of centerless minutes early on, and it was their shot
Playing a
profile.
lot of that right now, Lucas.
Yeah, that too.
I
Everything's
hate to
full
say it with
circle.
their injuries, but yes, but keep going. I know where you're headed.
No, it is true. And their offensive process was admirable, and it was the 21-22 season. They shoot, I think I'm looking at it right now, second lowest finishing percentage in the league at the rim. Then I'm not saying the Nets are quite that low yet, but they played a lot of centerless minutes. They established the identity that we see today. And, all of a sudden, we talk about finding the next Nets on this show all the time. They found Chet Holmgren, who is an unbelievable player, obviously, and is unique, but they built the process first, and then they were able to find the talent to plug up maybe the holes. But if you just want an easy comparison for the offensive process so far, I think Nets fans should be genuinely very excited about that. Despite some of the fact, Ben's missing a couple layups. Dorian is not like this huge rim finisher. That'll happen. But that was my biggest positive of the week. I just think their offensive process. And we also touched on the lack of size, which is a huge reason why they went 0-3 when, another outcome was definitely in reach, I would say. On that note, we got to talk about Brooklyn's finest. And so we're going to start with Cam Thomas, obviously, our kind of our quasi net of the week award. He scored 43 points in the Garden on Friday, and then I thought he was actually really great on Sunday, taking consistent double teams, and the Nets got so much good offense out of that. That was the first thing Jordy mentioned in his post-game press conference. And I don't know, he didn't have like a crazy stat line, but I just thought it was a great offensive week from him as a whole.
Absolutely. And to your point of just the continued growth and evolution in the process we see, man, he lit up the Garden on Friday. it was amazing to watch his efficiency, in particular, how he set the tone to start the game, because everyone else was struggling some, and his ability to dice up a defense, survey the floor, take different coverages, reads, players, personnel, all those things, and make some of the highest degree of difficulty shots look pretty flawless is amazing. And um, we talk often about Jordy calling it a superpower. It really, really is. But that superpower was not gifted to him. Like he's poured in all the work into his craft to be able to do those type of things. But I think to your point of how he's continuing to recognize ways in which it can open things up for teammates, taking advantage of those double teams to find open teammates, getting into his shot process or where he's going to relatively quickly off of possessions. So it doesn't feel like there's a lot of isolations or stagnant or, one on one, and also better looks on the defensive end, and that's why I thought the Friday, Sunday Knicks games was fun because it gives you a playoff feel, and so, no question, the Tom Thibodeau, that coaching staff, they've been in a ton of postseasons, they've had a ton of success, and so they're gonna make adjustments, and OG Anunoby was really, really, really good on Cam
Yeah.
Sunday, and they were also blitzing him a ton and throwing a bunch of double teams at him, so it made it a lot more challenging, but I also think to that point, I think he's eased into not forcing shots and figuring out how to best be efficient for the team on possessions. And yeah, just I continue to be very, very impressed with him.
Yeah, I think you can nitpick some of the individual plays and the decisions, like just overall with Cam Thomas. And like I write about that. I take a pretty granular look at the game, right? But in terms of just kind of the more general mindset he has from game to game, I think that's where you've seen growth. Obviously, every young player who handles the ball a lot is going to have possessions where they maybe press the wrong button and you can nitpick it or whatever. But, like, for example, in the fourth quarter of his 43-point performance on Friday, he had a couple turnovers where he drove. Maybe he picked the wrong side of the floor to go to. Maybe it was a little crowded over there. And, he had a couple turnovers, got the Knicks out and transitioned the other way. Right? He comes back on Sunday after that 43-point performance, and he's taking all the double teams. They're getting really good offense out of it. And he only ends up with 3 assists. But as Jordy talks about, it's the hockey assists, right? It's getting the ball out of your hands and then letting your teammates kind of navigate the rest. And that's where a really good half-court offense on Sunday. And it almost exclusively started with the Knicks doubling Cam Thomas and then the Nets working off of that. And again, they only score 104 points because they're not really playing in transition, not getting a ton of offensive boards, stuff like that. But I was just super impressed with his process the whole weekend. And obviously, I'm bearing the lead. And the guy's like just an absurd shot maker. The one where he took the handoff on Friday on the left side of the court, pump faked OG Anunoby, and then took a dribble to the right, and Huck Porty and Anunoby contested his fall away 3. Yeah.
Were they both crossing each other?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And maybe he got fouled. Maybe it was a landing space foul. Who knows? Early in the fourth quarter, I was just laughing on I don't know how you don't just start laughing on the broadcast.
Sometimes you do. Well, because you see the urgency of players trying to just desperately close out on him and get a hand in his face or do anything. And I continue to be amazed. And it's not, but his 6'2" size, there's a couple things. Um, One, like when he gets shots off, I see whether it's a 6'8", 6'9", 10 guy, like closing out on tough, it doesn't matter. I'm just like, how did he get that shot off and do it in his normal shooting motion? And the other thing I would say too, just at the basket or just different points, he's so strong. We say this often about him, like his frame, his body, his like he is just so strong. His hands are strong. Like he's strong with his handles, like going through traffic in the lane. Like there's just so many aspects to it that yeah, you could see the beautiful shots at the end and the shot making that blows your mind. But how he gets to the spots on the floor where he wants to go to, and he just is able to be so commanding in how he's cutting through a defense. That to me is, continues just to make you shake your head.
Yeah, you don't really think of it this way because he's not dunking on people, but he's just such an explosive athlete in terms of his lower body, in terms of the elevation he gets on his jumpers and the space he creates with like these sudden movements, almost like an NFL running back making jump cuts, and it's just so explosive. He had a step back against Mikal Bridges that he missed on Friday, but he like created 8 feet of space with a little
I
step
was just
back
about to say
on the
the
in the
amount of
corner.
ground
Yeah,
that he covers,
yeah.
unbelievable. To that point, because I'm gonna hit you. I was thinking you might go with Cam Thomas, your Brooklyn's finest. So I wanted to have a contrasting one. But I would say this. I would say this in regards to talking about that with Cam. You could say this about a lot of Nets players with the style that Jordy Fernandez is asking of them. But Dorian Finney-Smith, like,
Yeah.
let me just take a few moments to shout his praises of the things that he does that show up on the box score and the things he does that do not, that are integral to a team functioning how they want to, finding wins, even if it's not wins. Just so many areas of the game that he is. I don't even want to say a glue guy because I think like he impacts the game every single possession, regardless of what he's doing. And his 3-point shot as of late, last 6, 7 games, has gone down at a consistent rate, which obviously is extremely helpful for the offense. But
Hmm.
defensively, he is asked to guard such a variety. Like we use the term, being able to guard multiple positions. Like, what does that even mean anymore? Like, what are this is almost a
Hmm.
positionless NBA. Everyone plays different, can handle, can pass, can shoot. Um, he just has such an acute understanding of different personnel, who he's up against, how he needs to play, whether it's a guard, whether, he could be on Jalen Brunson, he could be on Karl Anthony Towns, he could be
Yep.
on OG, and just he does it seamlessly, and I continue to be impressed with how he's able, um, to just be that versatile piece that Brooklyn has so often needed, and I really just respect how he approaches the game, and we talk a lot about these players, like, the conditioning of their bodies. I think oftentimes viewers watching or fans watching, like, they're not robots. These are human beings that they're doing insane things and they get exhausted. And so the conditioning aspect of it, the possession by possession basis, I have so much respect for all of that. And he is one guy that I think lays it on the line every possession. And I think every team can find such a value in that.
Yeah, I just think I love when we mention him on the show, and especially for Brooklyn's finest, because it's a player that watching him up close. I'm not saying fans, that are not us can't appreciate him, but watching him and what he goes through up close as we do, you really almost want to just preach about how integral he is to this team. He had a play. I was just rewatching some stuff where he is like 10 feet behind Ariel Hukporti, a 7-footer who he's matched up with, sprints the floor in transition, ends up like 10 feet ahead of him to create a corner three. And defensively, he's playing like Nick Claxton because he's in drop coverage. He has to deal with the big, and then he has to
Mhm.
go contest a shot. And then at the end of the game, he's switching on to Jalen Brunson. And he does it with max effort all the time. And, the Nets fan in me that I've been my whole life, that now I'm a journalist covering the team, that part of me comes and goes. But when he shoves OG Anunoby to the floor and all of these Knicks fans are booing him, I'm like, okay, like I'll ride for him. That's all I'm saying. And it really brought it out of me in that moment with that orange court and him doing what needed to be done. And it sparked them. It sparked them after that moment.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I know this is, sometimes tough to look at after 3 losses, but again,
Right.
against 2 of the top teams or contending teams
Yeah.
in the Eastern Conference. But I think too, just is fans and viewers who watch it, like, it's important to remember that players defensively, that even if they get scored on, that are making it that, like, you're trying to make things as tough as possible for opponents, especially the
Hmm.
elite level offensive players.
Yeah.
So whether it's tough on the catch, whether it's possession by possession, uh, you hope that that eventually catches up or adds up at different points of the game, the end of the game. Whether on Friday you could look at the fourth quarter or
Yeah.
the third to fourth quarter of the Knicks and getting, maybe it took a foot off the gas a little, maybe they're just getting run down. Like, there's certain things that even if again, it goes back to the process. Even if players are making shots, or how difficult though are you making it for them? And I think Dorian won, but there's a lot of guys on this team that understand how to do that and do that game by game, and eventually that's all going to add up.
Definitely. I heard Iron Eagle had to restrain you from going over the table to defend Dorian during that little fracas on. I heard you wanted to get out there.
No, I didn't. What I think Noah had to refrain me from, like, jumping out to grab a loose ball or a
Oh,
ball that was, like, bouncing our way. I
it
always wanna
comes.
get a touch. I
I
always feel
know.
like if I just get a touch on it, you know?
I think they should let me take a couple. They should let the B writers take a couple shots pregame. That would get me in the mood.
With that
Um, yeah, just you get my creative juices flowing. Before we close with Brooklyn's finest, with the next net, who we're looking at for next week, I just wanted to ask about the defense quickly, right? I know they played these top teams, and I'm not, slamming their defense, but right now they're trending towards not getting killed on the glass defensively, kind of average, not forcing a ton of turnovers, but kind of average. But, they are giving up a lot of free throws. They're giving up a lot of shots at the rim. What's one achievable area? They're not going to turn into like a top 5 defense overnight. That's not how their team's built right now. But like, what's just one area you think could be a focus for the next week? Let's just get better at this.
Yeah, I think, there was a couple things, everything to your point, like the things you noted, there's nothing to me that's that glaring, that
Right.
stands out, like, this has to be the focus. So I think it is a lot of little things. So, to not give you a whole list of a lot of different things, I would say transition defense,
Okay.
in the sense of it was weird to me, and most notably in those Knicks games, but there's some in the Boston game. Brooklyn, for the most part, takes care of the ball well. Like, I don't think they turn the ball over a ton, the volume
Hmm.
of it, but it feels like the turnovers they have are more often than not live ball turnovers, and they feel like self-inflicted type miscues, and or just momentum shifting ones, or very untimely ones that put a lot of stress and strain, obviously, on your transition defense. And in many cases, some that it's not even transition defense, that teams are able just to go and get a quick two. But there was even times off of different shots, and I think that adds a shot selection, that it felt like they were a little more disorganized in their transition defense than I think we saw in
Hmm.
the early part of the season. And whether it was picking up the ball early, whether it was making sure that it's not just the one guy getting back, but everyone's getting back, identifying guys spraying out in the wings, running the lanes, all that stuff. It felt like there was moments that it could have been a little tighter on that. And whether that's you talked about this earlier in the show, like the offense defense goes hand in hand, and when you're not doing the things you can offensively, it's stressing your defense. But those two areas to me feel like ones that they are within the lane, to make them more correctable than what I think we've seen at this point.
Definitely. And, I like that they crash from the corners on offense, but I think sometimes the wings kind of get caught in between. There's a famous Hubie Brown saying, if you're not on the glass and you're not back, where the blank are you? I don't think it's
Yeah.
been that egregious, but, I think it's an area,
No.
definitely.
Yeah, just small,
Yeah,
small.
just small and an achievable goal, as I mentioned. And we had mentioned for the next net, we talked about it before the show. Welcome back, Trendon Watford. I think that's both of ours. It's a guy that we really want to see just get his feet under him. He's been so active, so jubilant on the bench. I think that's the word. And
That's a great word.
I
I may
think,
use
yeah,
that in the broadcast next.
I'll look out for it. Like, could be our new Ricochet. Um, However, you also see like not just the energy, but like what basketball wise he can bring to the court. Like they're doubling Cam Thomas. Trendon Watford there as an outlet. He had a sick wraparound pass on the baseline for a Cam Johnson 3 on Sunday. Just a big playmaker and like a guy who likes to get to the rim and likes to mix it up. And you just feels like a seamless energy fit right with this team.
And he looked great. I'll say this, in watching training camp prior to his injury, I thought he looked great.
Hmm.
You've said a lot of things of energy. He's got a level of physicality. He brings some size. He'll shoot the three. He's also someone that's very attack minded and willing
Yep.
to get downhill. Uh, Speaking of guarding multiple positions, like all those things that I feel like it helps to have on any team. And I also think we're still very early in season, but a guy that is that hungry to get back on the floor now and hasn't been able to play and now is ready to bust in and get things going. I think that burst and spark and just a little bit of a bump will be helpful. I'm going to add one more, side note or a 1B.
Oh, please do.
To the net, but I think we're probably gonna be talking about him later down the line or just see how things shake out, but in a very, very small sample size, I like what Tyrese Martin has done
Oh,
in
nice.
sparks and minutes that he's shown, and throughout the duration of whether it's the Long Island Nets, whether it's later down the season. Again, we'll see, knock on wood, I think some, things will shake up, you never know with injuries or moments or rest or whatever guys need. But I think he's kinda knocking at the door to being
Yep.
able to, in some ways, insert himself on given situations in the lineup and in the rotation, and I just feel like he's had a presence and a calmness of, I know what my role is to do. My role is to come in here and shoot threes, be really active defensively, and he's knocked down some. I think he's shown a level of poise that I'm very intrigued to see if he gets more time or however sporadic it is, what that looks like.
Definitely. And I think there was a reason in the Boston game with Dorian Finney-Smith out that he was inserted into the rotation and played real minutes, and he's been rewarded with the two-way contract. It's a sign that there are people that believe in him, and obviously a lot of that work has gone on behind the scenes because he hasn't played a ton of NBA minutes so far. But the fact that you can feel him knocking on the door,
Yeah, and
that's maybe a long-term next net.
exactly, and
Yeah,
Lucas, it made me a ton of time. I mean, similar, look at what Jalen Wilson is doing this year,
right,
and
right.
most of his time, like, I would almost make a template of that,
Mm-hmm,
of think about how much time he spent with the Long Island Nets, and
mm-hmm.
he immersed himself in the value of the minutes, of experience, of how he was able to continue to improve in those areas, and now we've seen the jump he's taken this season. And so even if it is a heavy dose of Long Island Nets for Tyrese, I think he's a player that down the line, with his size and shooting ability, could serve to be valuable.
Hey, Nick Claxton, Day'Ron Sharpe, Cam Thomas, Jalen Wilson, Noah Clowney, all spent long amounts of time in Long Island.
Mhm.
And Jalen Wilson, all of his minutes last year, the majority of them post All-Star break. It's a tried and true system. Mufanu Dofia, the coach down there, head coach of Long Island Nets, proven, winner, proven player
Awesome.
development guy,
Yes.
awesome.
Yes.
Everybody only says good things about him. On that note, one of those guys I just mentioned, Cam Thomas, Long Island to Brooklyn to MSG. He has in his career now 2 40-point games against the Knicks. Who is the only other net in franchise history that can say that? Regardless
240
regardless of home or away, 2 40-point games against the Knicks.
I thought there's more than one, but maybe not.
I
Well,
believe this is the only other player with multiple.
Derek Coleman,
No, a little before.
more recent.
No, a little
You mean?
earlier in history.
So, like, before, like, Bernard
That's the one.
King?
Bernard King.
Okay.
Yeah, you
Okay.
got it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Why did I think, oh, no, you're right. DC is 30-point games.
Yes,
You're correct.
yes.
You're correct. DC, I think, has had 3 30-point games at the
Mhm.
Garden or against the Knicks. Oh, yeah, Bernard.
Bernard.
You know
One,
what? There's a
yeah.
lot of Bernard. If ever I'm stuck for a answer to a Nets trivia question that it feels like it's a little bit before, I typically am gonna ride with Bernard.
Yes, underrated, awesome, historic NBA player. Went 6-7 seasons between averaging 28 points a game, like in the
Wait,
80s.
but honestly, how wild is that? Like, that's important.
Yeah,
Think about KD's big games, Kyrie's games, Vince, Richard, J.
yeah,
Kidd, like, you
yeah.
can go down the list of a lot of great Nets, but the fact that that's who Cam Thomas is sitting with in
And he's
that type
only
of company,
24.
that's impressive. That is
By the way,
extremely, extremely impressive.
it is, and kind of a lot of Bernard King and Cam Thomas's game. If you really want to, like, both mid-range assassins, both getting to their spots, 12, 14 feet. I'm like, if you watch old Bernard King highlights and you try to think about how his game would translate to the modern NBA,
That's
Cam Thomas
that's
is
who.
actually not a bad analog, which is cool
Okay. Okay. I like this. I like
for all
this.
my real sickos out there. New York legend. And Cam Thomas becoming a New York legend and half a New York villain, because those 18,000 New Yorkers in MSG were very
They're
upset.
like, don't let him touch the ball.
I heard the gasps. I'm sure you heard a lot of hilarious comments from
Oh
the
my
crowd
goodness.
from your perch.
Oh, because I think too, we see like we witness it so much or so often, and you never become numb to it. But I think for visitors or opponents or opposing fans, like you can look at numbers or be like, oh, that guy, yeah, oh, that
Yeah,
Cam Thomas, yeah, he's a scorer. He had this. When you see how he does it or shots
yeah.
that he makes, it's just like, oh man, yeah,
Yeah,
amazing.
Brian Scalabrine was hilarious on the Boston broadcast in the first game of last week. I randomly got that on my league pass, and he was just falling all over himself.
Oh, I
Talking,
bet, I
yeah,
bet, I
yeah,
bet.
very exuberant guy, great broadcaster, as is Sarah Kustok. And that brings us to the end of episode 5. I think it's been a great start to the season for us. I think it's been an entertaining start to the season for Brooklyn. They have another NBA Cup game on Tuesday. Then they go on the road. And we will be back at you for episode 6 next week. This has been the Backcourt presented by Ticketmaster. Have a great week, guys. Thanks for listening.